I didn't get my fade out. Sorry, you guys. I didn't hit the button. Welcome to Resistance Live. It's the 10th of June, 2025. I'm going to warn you that I may get a little ranty at one point in this broadcast because there's just something that was posted this morning on the Patreon feed that I have since learned has gone viral on Facebook that is so offensive about what's happening in LA that I can kind of like hardly contain myself. So I'm just letting you all know that we will get to that point. And I'm going to explain to all of you like why it's really important to not engage in spiritual bypassing at this moment, to not be tone policing protesters in Los Angeles at this moment, and to not be following advice that will fail. Okay. So we're going to talk about all of that. But first, we're going to talk about what's happening in LA generally and the rollout of the Marines and the rollout of the California National Guard and Gavin Newsom suing the Trump administration and everything that goes along with that. Okay. First things first, today for our visually challenged viewers, I am wearing a puffy sleeved white blouse and my hair is pulled back and I have a pair of, I don't know, thicker gold hoops in. I'm a pink skin, green eyed, dirty blonde haired woman. I'm in front of my bookshelf and my yellow utility cart. I'm coming to you as always from occupied Muncie, Lenape and Mohican land. Okay. So yesterday, quite illegally, to answer the question in the thumbnail, Trump rolled out the Marines. And essentially what that means is that they mobilized 700, which now I think it's now at 2,000, but they mobilized 700 Marines out of 29 Palms, California, which is located very close to Joshua Tree. It is not, unlike what the alleged Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, said on social media, Camp Pendleton. It's a completely different location. And those Marines are being sent to Los Angeles. They are essentially being sent to Los Angeles to engage in illegal law enforcement function against the American people and people who live here who are rising up against ICE in LA. Both the mayor of Los Angeles, who was on Rachel Maddow last night, by the way, I encourage you to go watch that interview last night. It was really great. Both Karen Bass and Gavin Newsom have said that none of this is necessary, that the protests in Los Angeles have been in a very limited universe of space. By the way, this is what my friends in LA are saying also. Like, you know, I talked to somebody last night who was at the grocery store. All of LA is not a mess. These are very limited locations inside the enormity of Los Angeles that are currently experiencing an uprising. And there's no need for any of this. Both Gavin Newsom and Karen Bass have said it. This is an escalation by the administration. It is an attempt to scare people. And by the way, it's also failing. So one of the things that we talked about on the bonus broadcast that I did on Sunday here was like the weakness of how this looks, right? And one of the things that I want people to remember here is that we're talking about several hundred people in the streets of Los Angeles. Many of you, I hope, have been watching the footage on Blue Sky where there are like pockets of like 50 or 100 or 200 or 400 people. It's not a huge, enormous amount. And they're rolling out like, you know, we're at war. And part of that is, as Rachel said last night, by the way, you should go watch the A Block from Rachel Maddow last night if you didn't. That's because Trump is terrified. One of the things that they didn't anticipate when they did this was that there would be widespread pushback against these invasions into people's communities by ICE. They did not expect that there would be organic uprising in the streets. I mean, and fundamentally, like a lot of this started in San Diego last weekend when the raid of that restaurant happened and people spontaneously objected in the streets of that neighborhood. Now that has happened in Los Angeles, and we're seeing pop-up protests around the country now as well. In Dallas, last night Dallas had a huge protest. Austin, last night they used flashbangs and tear gas against protesters in Austin in front of the ICE building there. We're seeing protests in Denver, in New York City, all around the country. And these are organic protests that are popping up all over the place in solidarity for what's happening in Los Angeles. The Trump administration is entirely unprepared to deal with this. There is no way that they will be able to contain this uprising in the event that it continues. And they know that. The other thing that this is showing them, by the way, which is really important, is that there are way more of us out here objecting to this than there are adequate forces to put people down, meaning to like create violence or, you know, arrest people or do the things that they claim to want to do to scare people. And, you know, meanwhile, we've got Pam Bondi on Fox News saying, like, if you spit at us, we're going to hit you, right? You know, other people from the administration out there threatening wild violence against people simply using their First Amendment rights. So the issue with this, and this is a really important lens that I want everybody to understand here, is that they can't, if we have protests in, like 1,800 places around the country, which by the way is, the number of sites that No Kings is going to be this weekend. If you have protests in 1,800 places against ICE, you have organic uprisings where people are intervening in the context of trying to stop ICE from perpetrating violence against people in their own communities. They do not have the manpower to stop that. And so what they're trying to do here, in some sense, I don't agree with everybody who's saying they're using LA as a test case, but they're trying to make an example of Los Angeles. They're going to roll out the Marines illegally, not allowed to do it, can't use the US military against US people, not allowed to do it. It's totally illegal. They're going to try to do it anyway. And and there will be violence associated with it because we've already seen an enormous amount of police violence from the LAPD and the National Guard in terms of firing 40 millimeter rubber bullets at people that have shattered people's legs, right? People have been hit in the head with tear gas canisters. This is not nonviolent from the police and the National Guard, and it won't be nonviolent from the Marines. And what they're going to try to do is just terrify people. Okay, that's the point of this, is to scare people into silence, to scare people into not rising up where they live, to scare people into letting them black bag immigrant mothers from their toddlers in the streets of your town. That's what's at stake here. And the thing that they realize, and the place where they know they're weak, is that they can't stop it everywhere. So they're going to try to stop it in one place with an enormous amount of military force to try to convince people that there's no point in rising up. I will tell you that I think it belies how scared they are. I think they know that they're out of their depth. And I also have to say that I think one of the things that we've talked about here already that I just want to reiterate is California National Guardsmen and women and non-binary people live in these communities, right? They're asking people who live in these places to go out and, shoot tear gas and flashbangs and, these enormously painful rubber bullets at their fellow community members. And they have sent the National Guard there without giving them beds, without giving them housing allowances, without giving them food. There's footage, Gavin Newsom has been posting it. There's footage of these deployed National Guardsmen sleeping on top of each other on the floors of public buildings. So that's not a great way to keep morale up, right? That's not a great way to keep people from, defecting. None of this is good from the perspective of them being in control of the situation. And we have to see it through the lens of, what it is. They're terrified. And, the reality is here that we don't know where this kind of an organic uprising is going to lead to. Okay. So for the people who are feeling pessimistic in the comments, the people who are who's going to stop him from doing this? I'm just going to say this. We are. Because you got to start thinking bigger. This is the other thing I just have to say about this. Just imagine what would happen if there were defections from the National Guard. If you had National Guardsmen who were done with this, who actually stood in line with the protesters, objecting to what ICE is doing in their own communities. Just imagine what would happen if you have Marines who refuse en masse to follow illegal orders. Because they're allowed to do that, by the way. There's whole GI hotlines set up for this. If they're ordered to fire bullets on US citizens, that's an illegal order. It's illegal. They don't have to follow it. So again, this is one of those situations where we've got to get broad in thinking about how this could go, because there's no guarantee that this is going to work. In fact, quite the contrary. And so one of the things that I want people to consider here is that, this is an attempt by them to silence the rest of us who are not in LA right now. And the question you have to ask yourself is whether or not you're going to fall for it. We talked about this a lot on Sunday. Are you going to fall for the propaganda? Are you going to fall for the idea that all hope is lost and that they get to terrify people into silence with acts of violence? No, you don't have to fall for that. That's a choice. That's a choice. Okay, something that I want to mention is that Gavin Newsom has in fact sued the Trump administration now concerning the rollout of the National Guard. Somebody said to me this morning that they'd seen a suggestion on social media that Gavin Newsom should just give an order for the California National Guard to stand down. The problem with that is that Trump has now federalized this portion of the National Guard. And that means that technically the Trump administration is in charge of their orders. So the only way for Gavin Newsom to deal with this is to go to court and get an injunction that states from a federal court that the National Guard has to stand down because Trump is acting outside of his authority. All right. That's why he did that. And I will tell you that there isn't any, there isn't any reason at this point for Newsom to not go to court. Okay. So one of the things that I just want people to consider here is that pushback is happening against what the Trump administration is doing on a bunch of different fronts. And I think it's very important to keep in mind here that they are way out over their skis. Legally, they're way out over their skis. They don't seem to have a plan. I'm not alone in saying this, but I said it last night on Blue Sky. They don't seem to have an end game in this. The way that they're talking in their Fox News interviews is essentially that they're just going to keep ramping up and ramping up and ramping up, which is only like a recipe for more violence. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to win, so that's, and I mean that both from an optics and from a logistical standpoint. So all of this at this point, it is a shit show. That's probably the best way to put it. Okay. So we have to talk about a couple of other things related to this that are, and the other thing I should mention before I move on to the other thing is that Tom Homan threatened to arrest Gavin Newsom. And then Donald Trump, on his way back from Camp David yesterday, said that he thought it was a good idea to arrest Gavin Newsom. And then he was asked later what crimes Gavin Newsom had committed, and he couldn't answer the question. So let me just say this. If the governor of California is arrested by ICE, not only is he going to be instantly released because he hasn't committed any kind of a crime, but also that is going to amplify what is happening from protest situation in California beyond belief. It may actually result in a movement for Californians to just simply stop paying taxes or do other sorts of things that would deny the revenue of the world's 5th largest economy from the United States federal government. I could see all sorts of ways in which this could devolve if they take it up to that point. Okay. But Gavin Newsom hasn't committed any crime. He's leading the people who he was elected to lead. And while I am not terribly pleased with Gavin Newsom right now, a lot of the time, I will say that, his pushback on this against Tom Homan was very well articulated. And, at the moment, at least, he seems to be standing up, which is good. Although I will say there was news yesterday, which I was really grossed out by, which is that he's going to be on Dr. Phil's podcast show, whatever it is, this week. And he gave Dr. Phil permission to be embedded with the ICE raids that were taking place in California. Why would you do that? Why would you do that? So, I have to say that, I have very mixed feelings about Gavin Newsom right now, but nonetheless, at least there's pushback right now, which we desperately need. Okay. So we have to talk about a couple of other things here. I warned you guys at the top, I might get a little ranty today. So let me just say one thing. Okay. So one of the things that the protesters did in LA on Sunday, and this was genius. Okay. So I'm going to be really blunt about this. Okay. Is they summoned Whimos. And there may be some people in our audience who don't know what a Waymo is. Okay. Waymo is a self-driving taxi, basically. And you summon it on an app and it shows up and you get in it and takes you where you want to go. And they've got them all over the West Coast now. So what the protesters did was they summoned Whimos to the location where they were in standoffs with the police to use the Whimos as barricades, essentially. Genius. And then in some instances, they set the Whimos on fire so that they could not be moved. Okay. Now, let me just say something. Lots of people out there watching this from afar, oh my God, they set some cars on fire. Okay. So let me just say something about this. All right. Literally, mothers are being snatched from their toddlers on the street. Parents are being black-bagged and kidnapped away from their families in front of their homes, in their places of employment, in front of a Home Depot, or when they're showing up to comply with immigration law at immigration hearings. Anybody who's objecting to a couple of Waymos being set on fire needs a real perspective check, okay? Because the loss of a few cars to create a barricade between the police and legitimate protesters when the police are shooting people, harming them, shooting tear gas at people, shooting flashbangs, right? When the police themselves are destroying property, because by the way, last night, you may not have seen the footage of this, the police shot rubber bullets at whole swaths of retail stores in Los Angeles when protesters were standing in front of them, shattered glass, broke down parts of buildings, okay? Seriously, from this perspective, I'm not really bothered by the Waymos. And I have to say that I think actually from a logistical standpoint, it was fairly brilliant strategy from the protesters to find a way to create a barricade that could not be moved between themselves and the police forces. Okay. I'm going to say one other thing about this, by the way, which I think is really important. One of the things that white people tend to do in the context of an organic uprising of this kind is to get really wound up about looting. Okay. Really, whoa, looting. Oh my God. Somebody stole a bag of diapers from a CVS. Okay. So let me say one other thing about this. All right. It's really important to understand what we're up against. Okay. Anytime somebody says, oh my God, there's looting. Somebody stole some food that they desperately need to eat. Somebody stole some baby formula. I want you to think about the flip side of that. In fact, I mean, I'll just say this. You should go watch the video that's out there with audio that is on my Blue Sky of a baby screaming for her mother as ICE kidnapped that mother away from her. You should go watch that. And ask yourself which one has more value. The bag of diapers that somebody's stealing from a CVS or the life of a toddler? The safety and the sanctity of her own family. So, you know, that's, I just have to say this, like white people get really wound up about property. And, you know, I'm going to say this, like there is no property that is more valuable than the lives of these people who are being kidnapped and taken away and deported to foreign countries, often not even their countries of origin. Families are being split up. These are legitimate, hardworking people, and they don't even have to be hardworking. I know we always put that in the context of capitalism. It can be somebody who's just here trying to raise a family, right? Somebody who's here just trying to make a better life. They're not going after bad guys, you know, not that there is such a thing. They're not going after convicted criminals. They're literally snatching parents away from children who were born here. So, you know, this is all really important perspective that you need to have. Okay, now I have to get to the part of the conversation today where I may get a little ranty because I'm really bothered by this. There is apparently a Facebook post that has gone viral, written by a woman, quoting Peter Coyote, claiming that there are all sorts of things that the protesters should be doing for optics to, you know, make this all look better to the American people. Okay. I have to make a distinction here because I think a lot of people are missing this point. And this is something that Kelly Hayes said yesterday, and it's really critical. Okay. What we're looking at in LA is not a planned protest. Okay. This is not a mobilization where people are seeking, like, you know, park permits and where, like, you know, there are legal advisors, you know, who have been trained on site, where there are tents set up for water and there are like porta potties in the corner. This is an organic uprising against state violence. That's what it is. Okay. It is not like a kind of like, you know, people are getting together and deciding that they're going to show up like at a certain place at a certain time with a month's notice. These are people who are absolutely fed up and disgusted by the invasion of ICE into their own communities. Okay. So the Facebook post makes all these kind of like crazy recommendations. And I'm using that word purposefully because I got to tell you, this optics conversation has made me totally mental. And I'm not alone in this, by the way. Like, if those of you who follow Pearlmania, you know, he did an incredible video overnight about how optics don't matter in LA. About this issue of like, what flag are you carrying, right? Is the dumbest possible response to what's happening right now that we could possibly expect from white people. Okay. Like ugh. So this Facebook post makes certain recommendations. It says like, you should go home at night when there's protests. I'm just going to say this, like, do you think the fascists are going to, you know, respond and stop what they're doing if people go home at night? It says that you should dress like you're going to church when you show up for a protest. Really? That's something that's going to make the fascists stop kidnapping people off the streets? That's going to make the American people sympathetic? More like, you know, people who weren't sympathetic to parents being snatched from toddlers are going to be sympathetic if you dress like you're going to church? You know, that said that, like, you know, women should be organizing this because we're more gentle. Not feeling very gentle this morning. Sorry, folks. You know, said things like there should be monitors at protests. And if there's any sign of violence, the monitor should blow the whistle and everybody should sit down. Do people actually think any of this is going to work? Like, legitimately work? Okay, so I mentioned this on Blue Sky this morning, and somebody posted a picture of like Martin Luther King marching in Birmingham, Alabama, and said, did this not work? So let me say something about that, all right? Peaceful nonviolent protest as an organized form of resistance has its place, okay? You guys have heard me say this many, many times before, right? That I am, generally speaking, a nonviolent person, that the studies show that nonviolent organized protests tend to move the needle and result in better futures for countries, right? Like when things flip over, nonviolent revolution tends to have a more sustaining effect, okay? This is not an organized protest, okay? So like all this stuff about how like you should sit down, I mean, it makes me completely mental. Like honestly, it makes me completely mental because what we're up against is fascism. Like this is not a situation where armed military, I mean, I'm sorry, I keep giggling at this because I have these mental images in my head of like hall monitors. Like I'm not joking about this. Like they recommended that the monitors wear yellow vests and carry whistles. And if there was any sign of violence whatsoever, that you whistle and everybody sit down. What I keep thinking about is literally how do you think the LAPD is going to respond to that? Do you think they're not going to shoot you with rubber bullets or real bullets if you sit down? You think they're not going to trample you with their horses like they already have? You think they're not going to tear gas you if you're sitting on the ground? Like, look at what we're dealing with. Look at what Los Angelenos are rising up against. Have some perspective, right? So let me talk about this flag situation also, because this just made me freaking livid. Talk about a double standard. All right. So there's this line out there that says, you should only be waving an American flag at the protest, right? Don't wave a Mexican flag. That's going to be provocative to the fascists. Okay, so my response to this is the other lens that I just have to put this in. I've had visceral reactions to this whole flag discourse for like the last 2 days, okay? Because part of what it's saying is like, don't trigger your abuser. If you only just like make him dinner a little bit more nicely, maybe he won't hit you. If you show up in an outfit that like covers up your boobs, maybe he won't get angry this time, right? It smacks of all that garbage. Like it's complicity. It's complicity. Nobody complained from the Trump administration when people were walking around with flags for Israel during like, the Palestinian protests, right? Nobody said to them, you're disloyal to America if you show up with an Israeli flag. Nobody said that, right? There's no objection to certain kinds of flags, right? There's no objection to that. And I also have to remind people of something really important because like, I know people, sorry, this is also a moment where like history really matters, okay? I know people who are like 7th generation Californians who can track their heritage back to when California was a part of Mexico, okay? Who like literally brown-skinned folks who literally have been asked by white people in California, where is your family from? And when they answer California, people look at them like, no, but where are you really from? No, I'm from California. Like my people were here before your people ever arrived. So the idea that carrying a Mexican flag in California to protest ICE is somehow going to trigger the fascists, that it's inappropriate. I mean, give me a in break. Seriously. Like what utter nonsense. Like somebody should go read about because I did this yesterday. I went and did like a little history reboot. Go read about the treaty after the Mexican-American War in 1848. The vast majority of Western and Southwestern states in this country were a part of Mexico at some time. That's not even counting Texas. So, this whole idea that like, if we just don't trigger them, they'll stop. If we're just nice enough to them and quiet enough and we sit down and we wear the right clothes and, we don't act out in response to their violence, maybe they'll stop. It's so misguided. And on top of it, it's really offensive. And the reason why it's really offensive is this, okay? Los Angeles is like the most populous metropolitan area in the United States. If you count like all of LA County, not just like LA City proper. Almost 10 million people, okay? The vast majority of those folks who are there, like the vast majority, live and work in communities where there are undocumented people, okay? I read a stat that like 1 in 35 people in California 1 in 35 people in the United States live in the LA metro area, okay? And that about a third of the population of Los Angeles is immigrants. Documented, undocumented, naturalized, or not, okay? The idea that anyone has a right to tell the people of Los Angeles how to respond to mass state violence against their neighbors is just really, really rich white privilege bullshit. And at this point, I'm going to say what Charlotte Clymer said yesterday. I'm going to say what I've said yesterday. I'm going to repeat it here. The only appropriate response to this, if you are on the side of justice, is like unconditional support of these protesters. Unconditional. Because they're fighting for people's lives. They're fighting for their neighbors and for their families. They're fed up and they've had enough. Don't judge what people are willing to do in the face of this kind of state-sponsored violence. Because I'm going to tell you something else. The only violence that's actually happening on the ground is coming from the LAPD and law enforcement. That's it. So, none of this right now is something that any of us from anywhere should be looking at through a lens of like, I get to say what these people are allowed to do to protect the lives of their loved ones and their families and themselves. I mean, come on, like deal with reality. Like this is the other thing, there's so many parallels I could draw to this, but like, I just, like you have to put this in the context of some forms of history, right? Like there's so many jokes that have been made about like Vichy France, right? And Neville Chamberlain and his capitulation to the Nazis. Like essentially that's what all these people are recommending when they say that like they shouldn't be allowed to fly a Mexican flag, right? Just capitulate to them. It's okay. They're not as bad as they look. They'll stop. Don't trigger them. That's the message, right? Come on. I mean, like this is one of the things that I think needs to be really critically understood here also, just because I haven't made this point yet, is that they don't need an excuse to perpetrate violence against immigrants or trans people or anybody marginalized. There's not anything that any one of us can do in the standpoint of like, let me just hide a little bit, be quiet. It's going to stop the like mass effort in this. The only thing that's going to stop it actually is mass uprising, because the Democratic Party isn't doing shit. You haven't heard a thing out of like Democratic Party leadership about what's happening in LA. Like a couple people have stood up and said it's wrong, but there's not like a mass Democratic Party messaging strategy in relation to this. They're sitting over there twiddling their thumbs while Fox News is claiming that Los Angeles is burning. So the place from which we have to approach this now is a place of unconditional support for people who are fighting back and fighting for their lives. Truly. And, anybody who's like worried about property damage or graffiti, I don't know why the media is like frothing at the mouth about graffiti. I mean, there's graffiti everywhere. Like, have you driven into some of you haven't. Have you driven into New York City on the 1-9? I mean, like, there's graffiti everywhere, right? Again, like you have to really see this through the lens of perspective and proportionality. One of the things that I just have to advocate for here is that if you see things like people should dress for church, there should be hall monitors at the protests to make people sit down and be quiet, right? That like, you should go home at night. You see people writing stuff like that. And worse yet, doing it in the name of like spiritual practice, you should call it out, okay? Because in the face of what is happening in this country, right? In the face of what is happening, the strategies that are being employed in Los Angeles by the people who are protesting are entirely legitimate. And like, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. It's just really that simple. Okay, that's my rant for today. I warned you I was going to get a little ranty. Okay, final thing I have to say today is that No Kings is coming up on Saturday. By the way, Ezra Levin, friend of mine, was also on Rachel Maddow last night, co-founder of Indivisible, along with Leah Greenberg. You can go to the indivisible.org site and find the local No Kings protests near you. There are more than 1,800 of them planned nationwide. The map is like covered. Please show up. Like this is a really important time to show up. And, right now, at least the numbers are moving in the direction of it being the largest mass mobilization against Trump that we've seen yet. Okay. Very important to show up for these. And very, very important, by the way, because there's like pop-up, as I said, pop-up ICE protests happening everywhere. There's another one in New York City today. Show up if there is a solidarity protest against ICE where you live, right? Pay attention to what's happening in your local area, okay? Because the more this happens in small towns and cities and other locations, the more that people stand up and say, this is not okay. I'm not going to allow people to be snatched out of my own community. I refuse to be complicit in this, because silence, by the way, is complicity. The more that we do that, the more obvious it's going to be that the Trump administration doesn't have a leg to stand on. So be the person who inspires others where you live. Be the model that other people need right now to show others how to stand up. Be that person if you are at all able. And some of us aren't, okay? But if you're able to be that person, right? Be the person who shows others that, like the response to this is no, not on our watch. No. It's that simple. Okay, so no Kings on Saturday. You should go do that. Also, please show up for your local Pride events. This is something else I just have to say because it's Pride Month. Like the LGBTQ community, trans folks in particular, really need our support this year. Please go out for Pride. Like if you're not going to march at a Pride event or you're not going to attend a Pride rally, like, where people are like out and about, like you can go and show your support. You can make a donation to your local LGBTQ rights organization. You can go watch performances. They're awesome. Go watch a drag show and, like give people some money, right? Do all those kinds of things to make sure that you are showing support because it's rough out there for people right now. Like it's really rough. And there is a deep worthiness in supporting trans and LGBTQ joy at this moment. It's so needed. I mean, it's so needed. I also will just say that like, it will give your soul the nourishment that you need. Like I went to a Pride celebration on Sunday. Those of you who saw the Sunday broadcast already know this. And my heart was so warm by the time it was over. Like sitting in our local congregation with like trans folks smiling and happy and like our queer community celebrating and handing out flowers. I mean, it's amazing. You should go participate in it. It's so critical. All right. That's it for today. I will be here live tomorrow, as always. And also, you can go check out the video that we pushed out yesterday about how to vet the people you organize with for planned organizing. Very critical and important work. And I will catch you all here live tomorrow. All right. Keep up the good work, everybody. Please stand behind the protesters. I'll also just say one other thing. If you're looking for a place to make donations, you can make them to Chirla. That's CHIRLA, which is one of the largest and most active immigrant rights organizations in LA. I did some collaborative work with them like 6 years ago. They're amazing. Also, I will just mention that Kelly Hayes on her podcast, which I think is called Organizing My Thoughts, has Silky Shaw there this week, who is the head of Detention Watch, which does all sorts of monitoring and activation work around human detention worldwide, including, of course, by ICE. So you should check that out also. And please stay on top of the feeds. The people that I'm following the most right now, in addition to like local reporters on the ground in LA, very important, are, of course, Mariam Kaba, Kelly Hayes, various other folks who are longtime movement builders. Please listen to the people who know what they're talking about. Okay. Very, very, very important. All right. Lots of love, everybody. I will catch you back here live tomorrow. Please don't forget to like and subscribe to the broadcast. I always forget this. If you like what we're doing here, please consider becoming a subscriber at patreon.com/resistancelive. That money helps me pay my staff behind the scenes and allows me to keep doing this work and still feed my kids. So please become a paid subscriber if it is within your means. It's not crazy expensive. It's like $5 a month over at Patreon. All right, my friends, lots of love. I will catch you back here tomorrow. Bye.